Okay, well, welcome back to a special episode of OK&Y podcast. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about Cube. We're talking about Cube because we've been doing a lot of limited lately because everybody has since it's Outsiders. Um, but I actually have not. Oliver has done, I think, like, what, 5 drafts without me so far?
Three.
How many drafts have you done?
Just three.
But you've done only 3? You also done 2 pre-releases without me, or 1 pre-release without me.
Pre-release. We don't count that.
Yeah, so Oliver's been doing a lot more limited. I have not because my attention has been focused mostly on theory crafting. Um, and I want to talk about limited. So let's talk about limited. Um, I have a post on Reddit where I talk about our personal cube. You've probably seen a couple of videos that we posted in the past about it. Um, it is called the Midwinter Cube. If you want to see it and read about it, you can read about it in the link below. But I wanted to go in the details on how it was created. Um, General talks about how to make a FAB cube, and then our general process for creating that so that you can make your own cube if you are interested. I think cube is probably one of my favorite formats in Magic, so I am always happy to bring that into another game. So yeah, anything you want to add before we get started, Oliver?
Nope. Keep going.
Okay, so Midwinter Cube. Um, the cube itself is for a 4 hero limited format. The heroes are Kano, Icelander, Lexi, and Azalea. Um, and basically, we draft it similar to how we would draft a normal set, like Arcane Rising or Monarch or any of the or Outsiders. Basically, you create packs, and then when we get 8 players, you open those packs, pass cards around, make your deck, play some games. They're good. They're great games. It's fun. I highly recommend it. I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but I do think it's probably one of our more successful experiments into um, alternative formats for FAB. If you have if you are interested and you like limited, definitely try it out. The reason why we chose these 4 heroes was, well, I was I kind of wanted to do Ranger and Wizard, most because Azalea and Kano have some neat little overlaps in terms of limited card designs. And at the time we were creating this, Azalea was not tier 1, and Kano is where he's always been, tier 5 or wherever he is. So I feel like a lot of players would enjoy an experience where we would create an environment that Azalea and Kano could shine in.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, we were doing this before Uprising came out, so Icelander had no support.
Yes. We finished it actually after Uprising came out, I believe. So we just started adding cards to it. But our first concept of the cube was before Uprising. Um, this was actually brainstormed with the help of Yuki, Yuki Lee Bender. She has her own podcast. Uh, go watch it. It's in the description below. But yeah, so after Uprising released, we had Icelander support, and we had plenty of stuff to work with to make an interesting draft format with these 4 heroes. So the main kind of connections that these cubes have is that you can draft Ranger as either Azalea or Lexi. You can draft Wizard as either Kano or Icelander, or you can draft Ice cards and then go into Lexi or Icelander. This was before Outsiders was revealed, so we figured this overlap would create the most flexibility in terms of drafting. The main complaint with Uprising and with previous draft formats at the time was how inflexible your picks were after the first few picks. So it was our goal to kind of create a environment that we could potentially stay open as long as possible and see how far we could push that and make it closer to a uh, more traditional Magic drafting experience. To do that, obviously, we needed to first figure out how many playable cards each hero has. So generally with retail limited, that's what I'll call all the booster draft formats that we've had so far in Flesh and Blood. Generally with retail limited, we only have about 50% of the cards in the pack at most are playable by a single hero. So if you look at Welcome to Wraith and how they structured their booster packs, you had 4 generics, which any hero could play, and then you had 1 to 2 cards per class, so per hero. So if I wanted to play Bravo, and I was only interested in playing Bravo, I could pick 1 or 2 of those 1 to 2 Guardian commons, 1 of those 4 generic commons, or some of the other slots which may or may not have Guardian cards. So 40 to, or rather, it's 30 to 60% of a pack could be playable by a hero at any given time. Because that led to a lot of the inflexibility comments, we wanted to see if we can increase that. So our general goal with a ratio of playable cards per pack is we wanted about 60 to 70% of the pack to be playable by a single hero. Obviously, with some heroes, that's going to be harder than the others, but I think we got it so that at least 50% of the pack is going to be playable by any given hero. This increases your number of choices, and that obviously increases the number of paths you can go down in terms of making your deck. So once we determine our general goal for ratios, then we have to determine how many slots we have to make these ratios happen. So in case you don't know how a booster pack is laid out in Flesh and Blood, there are multiple general slots that each individual card in the booster pack can come from. So slot 1 of a Welcome to Wraith pack is always going to be a generic card, right? And if you notice, Oliver will probably show a nice little graph here of our slot layout. We have 4 generics, a ice slot, an equipment slot, 2 cards of each base class, so that's 2 wizard cards, 2 ranger cards, 1 card for specifically Lexi, 1 card for specifically Icelander, and then 3 wild cards to make things a little bit more interesting and to make sure that signals aren't super easily read.
Yeah, there are also the simulate rares and foils. That was like the main thing.
So usually, exactly. So we don't really pay attention to rarity in this cube, but in normal booster packs, they have wild card slots, which are rares and foils that can come from any class. So there's the pack setup. And then once you determine this, you can easily determine how many cards of each pool that you want to create. So our target is 360 cards. The reason why we have 360 cards is because every booster draft is going to be 24 packs. Every pack we have set up is going to be 15 slots. 24 times 15, 360. So obviously the numbers, and if we just add up the numbers here in each slot, we're not going to be able to get to the 360. So we have to have a number of extra cards in certain pools of cards that function as this wild card pool. I think we eventually settled on 96 generics, and then extra cards of rangers and wizards, and a few extra cards for like Lexi and Icelander, just to make sure that we have enough support for hero-specific strategies, while also making sure that decks aren't mostly generics. So yeah, that's basically how we would set it up. As you can see, later on we settled on this final count. This is something that if you want to create a cube yourself and you want to curate the slots in your cube, you will have to kind of math out yourself. And then finally, we have all the cards here in our little spreadsheet. Because we don't have a dedicated site like Magic does, such as Cube Cobra or Cube Tutor for cubes, most cubes before those 2 sites existed in Magic used spreadsheets to keep track of how their cards were distributed, and this is what we used here. Alrighty. So, after we set up this cube, we just had a relatively basic draft, and Oliver will tell you later about how we picked out which cards go where, or which cards we wanted to try out first. But with most cubes, it's literally just, here are the cards I like. We're going to just put them in an environment together and see how it works out. Obviously, there's going to be some considerations made between like balance and stuff, but for the most part, it's just this is all the cards you want. These are the cards that will support certain deck styles. Go for it, and then we'll balance it later. So this is how a lot of players in Magic will approach their cube design. Generally, with Flesh and Blood, there's a couple of different considerations you have to make when you're designing a Flesh and Blood cube compared to a Magic cube. One, because you're not going to make a lot of the same choices that Magic cubes do because of how the game is structured differently. In Magic, for example, most cubes are singleton, as in they only have one copy of a card. That's pretty much not possible with Flesh and Blood. I mean, it's technically possible, but like it's not going to be a fun environment because Flesh and Blood decks are meant to be consistent, and you're meant to have a engine within the deck that you draw up and can achieve this goal every turn. With Magic, you have engine-based decks, and you have a lot of like cards that can function as pieces of a puzzle. But Magic designs are generally the card should be able to stand alone by itself and be somewhat functional. So that's one of the main differences between Magic and FAB. The other one is that prior to, I want to say like 2015 or so, a lot of Magic cube design, limited design, was focused on macro archetypes. I'm going to use a couple of some terminology that people might not be familiar with, so I'll try to explain as we go. Macro archetypes are basically aggro, control, combo, mid-range, tempo, whatever you guys want to talk about when we talk about like general deck types. Before, you had different colors, and you had strengths where you had where your colors in Magic were good at certain macro archetypes, but you didn't specifically seek to support certain types of decks. For example, in Black, you initially didn't support specifically Reanimator decks or specifically Vampire Tribal decks. You supported Black with some general good cards and a couple of cards to make things interesting and make a couple of decks happen. But for the most part, decks were macro archetype based. A lot of the core set limited designs were macro archetype based. Around the turn of, I said 2015 earlier, it's actually probably going to be like 2006 or so, around when Ravnica came out. Magic started focusing more on archetype-based design. So this is specific strategies that decks can play to stand out from one another. So instead of playing a control deck, you're playing a forecast deck, or you're playing a Orzhov Haunt deck because you want to play control. This is what Flesh and Blood design is based off of. You have to draft for specific archetypes, and those archetypes are generally made up of a collection of cards that form that care about a certain thing to create an engine. And an easy example for this is going to be ninja cards, right? You have ninja combo lines that you draft. You draft Surging Strike, you draft Whelming Gustwave, you draft McGinty Release sometimes, and you have a general shell of a deck that wants to play Surging Strike into Whelming Gustwave every turn. And that's all it wants to do, with some deviations, of course. So when you design a Flesh and Blood cube, obviously, these archetypes need a lot of support, and so you're going to need to support a few of these archetypes in one cube, and that's it. You can't just insert cards that you like in general and hope they work out. You have to actually support it. Fortunately, all the classes generally work well with other class cards with each other. As a result, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. As a result, when you design a Flesh and Blood cube, you have to make sure that the number of cards you're inserting in cube also they have enough cards in the cube to support this archetype. We didn't start off with just a couple copies of cards that we wanted. We started off with a bunch of copies. So, for example, we wanted to support Kano, right? And so Kano's really fun when you get to set up potions and when you get to storm off. So we made sure that Energy Potion Potion of Deja Vu, and a bunch of other cards that are able to help them storm off are actually in the cube. So this is the similar thing with Icelander. She needs a density of ice blues. And as a result, because you're not really beholden to including yellows and including reds in cube as a default, because you need to support other colors of cards, you can overload Icelander section with a bit more blues than normal to make sure that whoever drafts Icelander can get a reasonably consistent deck. So yeah, because of this, the cube itself is going to be a lot more powerful than normal. You'll notice that in Uprising, you occasionally got a really good deck, but for the most part, unless you're playing like Fi and you're like one of the, I guess, 3 Fi drafters in the table, your deck wasn't exactly always consistent. You have to make some sacrifices, like you have to not play a card because you don't have the resources. You have to, make a bunch of small sacrifices that you don't really like to do, but you have to do because you didn't draft the cards for it. So that's how we kind of initially approached the design. So yeah, do you want to talk about our first test, Oliver?
So yeah, let's go over the initial card choices first. Yeah, so the way I set this up was we split it up into the correct sections. So we had the Ice Wizard, Elemental, Ranger, etc., etc. We have like the expected number of cards that we want in each section, and we can we changed some of those numbers around to fit the packs better. And then we have our counts right here. Obviously, we know that Wizard wants to have more blue pitch, so I was keeping track of blue pitches, and then obviously the red pitch is for just like as a general rule, like if everyone drafts correctly, then you do like 124 divided by 8, right? So ideally, they would have the right number of, or like ideally each person will get 124 divided by 8 blues. Obviously this number is going to change, and then for building the right decks, I kept track of Ranger non-attacks and attack ratios, because you want to actually do damage. You can't really do damage with too many non-attacks. Anyways, the initial card choices, I was very wary of Go Again, and I was very wary of breakpoints. Go Again just turns into I will vomit my hand, and I'll do that every turn. Breakpoints makes it kind of annoying to block, and it benefits Ranger a lot more because they have the on hits.
Yeah, I will note that we started creating this around the time when like don't block, just dump your hand was the dominant meta. So we were kind of doing this as a response to the current meta game.
Yep.
That was around Everfest.
Yep. And since I play pretty much all the classes, I had a good idea of what the ideal deck looks like. So that's why you see a lot of blues in Icelander, and you see enough reds and enough blues in Kano to actually make a like 2 decent decks. Ideally, like it'd be 2 2 2 2, like everyone is on 2. So I just counted everything up and divided by 2, and yeah, you can make pretty decent decks that way. And then as Yichin was talking about, singleton doesn't really work. That's why you have multiple entry potions. We have like multiple sync bullets. Oh, also don't worry about the coloring. This is to denote changes between our versions. As you see here, we have all the changes, all the card changes between each version. So just don't worry about that. So our generics, we wanted to cover every single playstyle for Ranger and Wizard. So we have the come to fights that can work in both technically, because Icelander can run attack actions. This is also before Michael Hamilton did his Bowlander. So we do have Cadaver's Contrabands just as like cute stuff. Find those Fighting Spirits. Moonwish and Sunkiss, Yichin's favorite combo for some reason.
Yeah, I insisted that we include this. So when you're designing a cube, you can just do this. You can just say, I want this to work, and you force it in, and hopefully it works out.
Yeah. So we had a lot of chaff as well, like this blue Life for Life. Who's gonna play blue Life for Life? But it's there just for fun. Like we're also this is also just testing out to see if Singleton will work out. Spoiler alert, it does not. And then Whispers of the Oracle, that works for Azalea and Kano. So most of these cards have like a double or can be used in multiple heroes. Yep. And then for our equipment selection, we thought Quelling Slippers would be enough for a Ranger. Mostly because like Ranger can go pretty aggro and then block out whatever the response kill turn is for Wizard, but that was not the case. Yeah, so we will change all that. And another good reason why we chose Ranger and Wizard is because Ranger has natural AB. So with Skullbone Crossdraft and Bullseye Braces, if you're able to draft them, it takes up less slots in the equipment to get like standalone Norrøn. So that was Yep.
So yeah, our general approach with a lot of this, other than slapping stuff to the wall, was we want to find out where the interesting overlap is, and then just include cards that kind of contribute to that. So for Azalea and Kano, right, they shared a set which is Arcane Rising, and as a result, they have a lot of top deck synergy. And so we have a lot of top deck synergy in here from Arcane Rising because we're like, well, one, people haven't drafted Arcane Rising before, so they don't know how these cards work, and two, the synergy is already built in right there. And if you're designing your cube, you want to be on the lookout for these kind of generic bridges to include cards that both heroes would want, to make sure that there's enough tension in your draft and enough like cards in your draft that actually support the hero. Because even though you have a bunch of generics, not every hero is going to want every generic, right? So you don't want people to play like really bad cards just so that they have 30 cards in their deck.
Yep. Yeah, and then obviously we're not including the high-powered legendaries like New Horizons or Stormstriders, because if you open a pack with Stormstriders and New Horizons, you're going to go straight for those picks, and it doesn't make your choices very interesting.
Yeah. We do have a couple of very powerful cards. For example, Skullbone Crossdraft.
Yep, Skullbone Crossdraft, Metacarpus Node, Voltaire.
I'd say Bullseye Braces is probably pretty high up there too.
Yeah.
But like a bunch of cards that are like that are just like you just want to pick in general. And so you don't want. It's okay to have a couple of those because, especially with Flesh and Blood, because the overall card pool is so small, you're gonna have these naturally. You can't avoid it. Might as well make sure that you just limit that amount, and that way you limit the upper level of how strong decks can be in your cube, so that even if a player has a somewhat bad draft, they hopefully can have more of a fighting chance than they would if you had these like maximum power, basically constructed decks.
Yep. Yeah, and then clearly you can see I was too big on Ranger, and that's why Ranger had a lot of inefficiencies. So you see a lot of yellows in Ranger. You don't see as much efficiency in Ranger as compared to Wizard, because Wizard has not as many yellows. So spoiler alert, when we first tested this, Wizard won, Icelander won. Problem one was there was not enough Norrøn in the cube. So he was able to draft every single Norrøn item and then prevent everyone else from getting Norrøn, which allowed him to just sweep the table. Problem two was Ranger was too efficient with blocks and not enough damage. So the Ranger mirrors were going to fatigue, and sometimes just neither person will win. That will be fixed in the next version. And I believe there's a third issue. Oh, the third issue was...
Go ahead. Not enough go again, which is kind of tied to that.
Yes, not enough go again. Ranger, the Ranger plan wasn't aggressive enough. So
yep. It was very unsatisfying to play Ranger in this iteration, and that's totally fine. You're not going to get it right the first time around. Fortunately, we had the luxury of having friends, 6 friends who were available to test with us on a regular basis. So if you don't have 6 friends, my suggestion is either make 6 friends or offload the groundwork you have with drafting just by drafting the cube by yourself and seeing how it feels. There is a cube site in the works by Loose Leaf Tea, that's Tyler Loose, who runs the FAB Cube. It's not ready yet, but hopefully when that is ready, it should be a lot easier to find cubes and find some general literature around to make sure that when you're designing a cube, you don't make a couple common pitfalls that make for a bad limited experience.
Yep.
Like this one.
Yep.
So yeah, I will say though, our first test was successful in some aspects. Most importantly, I tested out how easy it was to pivot. I started off by drafting a few strong Azalea cards, and after a while, I noticed that people were actually gravitating towards Azalea. So I was like, okay, well, let's start drafting Kano cards, and we'll see how it goes. My first pick actually was, I think, either a 3 of a kind or like a Red Ledger or something. It was basically only Azalea playable. So I was like, let's try and draft Kano. This was around the end of pack 2, around pack 12, pick 12, when I saw a pack of like 3 wizard cards, and I was like, okay, wizards open, let's draft that. I was able to make a good Kano deck, and I only lost to the finalist. So I ended up going 2-1, losing in the finals to the Icelander. It might be a testament as to how powerful the Kano was, but subsequent tests of the cube have proved that we are able to pivot pretty late in the game, if necessary, if we see something's open. And so our initial test of these ratios for a good cube were successful in that regard.
Yeah. Another anecdote for me is I was able to pivot from Icelander to Lexi Pack 2 in one of our other versions. I think it was like version 1.2. And I went 3-0 in that draft. I only had like 8 arrows, but Voltaire is pretty strong, allowing arrows to give go again. So even though I didn't have that many arrows, I was still able to close out a lot of games just because like good break points and good damage. Yeah, Voltaire is good.
Yeah.
There was.
It's always good to just like talk about what went wrong, what went right with your drafters when you're done cubing, because then you can get insights and you can better iterate on this. That's why people do cube reports online. They'll just report how a draft went with their cube, and just like lessons learned and things that need to change, because building a cube is going to be an ever evolving process. There's no like end state where you're going to be completely satisfied with it. So obviously, the more you get data, the more you learn, and the better of a cube you'll hopefully end up getting.
Yeah. I think one thing we forgot to mention is since Azalea and Lexi share a pool and Kano and Icelander share a pool, this Ranger section has to have Azalea only cards. So that's why you have multiple Red Ledgers and Nox. Those are Azalea specializations. Ridge Rider Shot, good in both heroes, but more better for Azalea. Sikkim Shot, kind of an Azalea card. Yeah, you'll see most of these cards, like Read the Glide Path, more Azalea cards. You'll see like this kind of overlap a lot if you're going to be making one of these types of cubes.
Yeah, the main thing obviously is making sure that the virtual amount of picks a hero has is consistent between heroes. So obviously Lexi can play more cards in a vacuum than Azalea does. So among the cards that Lexi and Azalea share, you want to include more Azalea cards so that even though Lexi will pick a couple up, there are people who pick them up and pick mostly those Ranger cards are going to be biased towards playing Azalea.
Yeah, and you also have to make your Lexi picks competitive with the Ranger cards as well. So that's what I had in mind when I picked out the Blizzard Bolts, Chilling Ice Veins. Obviously, we want it to be ice focused, but there's also Lexi specific cards. So like there's a little bit of lightning in there, just to not let her hero ability go to waste.
Exactly. Yeah. As long as we have like interesting things a hero can do that they only can do, you'll have people that naturally will gravitate towards one or the other. You just gotta make them enticing enough.
Yep.
Which is hard for Azalea at the time, by the way.
Yeah.
We were like, this is actually really hard. But I think we got it to a good point around 1.2.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about our next iteration, which is 1.1.
Okay. So take a good look at all these red cards, or all the cards that are highlighted red. These are cards that we're going to be taking out and converting into different cards in our second version. All right. So obviously, the red cards in this spreadsheet are cards that we took out of this version to go to the next version. the green cards are the cards that we added in, and then this orange card right here is something that changed that we added in, but then removed in the next version.
Yeah.
Okay, so the easy thing is right here. Pretty much, Yichin wanted to make no rune, so the head slot to not be no rune. So that way, no rune is more limited, so you can't have like AB4. Yep. So we changed that to no rune robe. Blood drop brocade was not working out. We just had. Did you just buy classic a?
Yeah, we did. We just got classic battles, so yeah, perfect.
Yep. And then quelling sleeves, we just turned to no rune gloves. That makes it so there's more tension drafting the equipment between the rangers and wizards. So yeah, we just have no rune boots, and then added another skullbone cross strap because ranger was feeling a little bit down. It is also good to note that ranger was overdrafted in our first test, so yeah, that comes up a lot.
Yeah, we did factor in that. Obviously, you have to factor in your own drafter's quirks, but if you have a regular drafting group that you draft with, your cube is going to be naturally tailored to those drafters' preferences. So we noticed that ranger wasn't feeling good, but also was overdrafted, so we added more ranger cards, and we added cards that would make ranger feel a little bit better, basically.
Yeah, but we didn't want to push it too much. All right. Yeah. So we also noted, since the rangers were fatiguing too much, we took out a lot of the 3 blocks. We turned it to 2 blocks and more aggressive options. So we have multiple red life for our lives now. We added flocks for the quicken tokens. Did we add snapdragons in this one, or is that another one? That's probably the next one.
I think that was the next one. Yeah.
We also took out some defense reactions because obviously you don't want every breakpoint to be hit. So allowing more breakpoints to happen or to be available to the rangers would, in theory, buff them up. I took out Yichin's favorite combo because people were complaining it was hard to draft together.
Yeah.
Yep. So we changed some rifting stuff into more ranger stuff, and then obviously we trimmed some of the fat. Oasis or Spite Sigil protections, those weren't being really used by anyone. So we just changed it into more go again or more buffs. That's the flexible card. Take covers, we turned into Rain Razors. This isn't like an exact 1-to-1, but it's like close enough. I tried to make it close enough at least. And then obviously you see a lot of yellows being taken out and you see a lot of reds being put in.
Yep, so we just made the cube more aggressive in general, less blocks. The key takeaway from version 1.0 was not to get cube. Because every deck has its own engine and every deck wants to achieve that engine consistently, adding in cute little draft distractions doesn't actually work out most of the time. So for the longest time, I had been fighting for like all these cute cards just to be added in cube. And if you don't support these 2 cards and just kind of like add them in as like random slots, it doesn't actually work out.
Yeah.
Hence why we removed most of those. And you'll see most of the Sun Kisses Moon Wish that we didn't remove from the first version will get removed later on even more.
I think I still left 2 of them in.
You left 2. You left 2, and then we removed them later.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I added in Nimblism and Nimble Strike.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, right? Because Nimblism standardizes with everything else, and Nimble Strike in a pinch is just at worst like 1 for 4, right? So it's not the worst, and the cuteness of Nimblism plus Nimble Strike does not exclude either one from being included in a deck later on.
Yeah. So for this test, we did another test. You can find both of these tests on our YouTube channel, actually. It's the 2 Midwinter Cube drafts that we've uploaded. This test, Ranger was overdrafted again. And then we had another Icelander winning. But this time, this Icelander that won is probably the best Icelander in our area. So he was eating pretty good.
Yeah. He was also one of the only Icelander, I believe. Or no, he was. There's two Icelanders and one Kano, which was me again.
Yeah. I keep drafting Ranger because I'm just like, oh, I love all these Ranger cards and I love playing Ranger. And at that point, I wasn't playing Icelander yet, or I wasn't playing Icelander competitively, so I didn't really uh, want to tread that ground yet.
Yeah, a lot. So a lot of the people, a lot of the initial resistance to Kano, I think, was because people were just unfamiliar with how he plays and how he works, so they didn't really try and draft him. Um, and obviously that would change with time. But obviously, if your players just don't like playing Kano, it might just be better just to go back to the drawing board if you want to include Kano, right? Or if you want to make you want a simpler Kano deck. So if we continue to have problems with Kano, my thoughts were that we would swap out a lot of the combo cards and just replace it with efficient like good cards. To play a more like traditional like blast you type strategy. You have to make these decisions obviously based off of your group, and obviously it's not going to be the same for every group. For a lot of the anecdotal stories I've heard from people who built and played this cube with their friends, um, Azalea was still underpowered even in our latest versions. But a lot of that is because people naturally gravitated towards her and started overdrafting her. So as our drafters learned not to overdraft Azalea, we noticed that other players were still doing that. Just something to keep in mind as you build your cube. You're not going to be tailoring your cube to any people. You're tailoring it to the people that you play with.
Yeah. So going back to the reasons why we changed some of the cards, the Ranger mirrors, they were not going to fatigue anymore. They were ending with like easily 15 plus cards in deck, so that was a success. How did Kano feel? I haven't actually drafted Kano yet, even though I've drafted this a bunch of times.
I felt like Kano was good. We actually don't have too many Ranger Kano changes here.
Yeah.
Most of the changes that we made for Wizard in this iteration was just remove a couple of the power blues that Icelander has.
Yes, and then that will also be for next version too. That's for the next version. You'll see like
Yeah.
a lot of the blue cards is going to go down. So right now I change the Ranger blues and generic blues into red cards. So that's why this blue count is going lower. Yeah, there is some wizard changes, but most of the changes was in Ranger to make it feel more aggressive. Yep. All right. So going to the next version, we have take note of the red cards again. Okay.
Yeah. We'll see if they can actually read this. So we'll see.
I believe. This is a smaller change, but it is probably the best change. And I'm talking about Yichin's decision to make No Rune Robe a token.
Yeah. So we still have the issue in version 1.1 where players were just like valuing no rune equipment either too highly or too low. And the other thing we noted was that it never felt good to kind of quote unquote waste your pick on the rune robe because one, you might not actually use it. All your matchups could possibly be rangers. And two, it's boring. It's a boring card. Arcane Barrier is boring, right? It's just a generic like ability. So my thoughts were if we have one no rune pace as a baseline token that anybody can pick up and add to their deck, that would reduce the amount of pressure that no rune equipment have when drafting, but also reward players for drafting relevant no rune equipment in their wizard matchups. So we removed all the no rune robes and all the no rune robes from our chest slot in the main cube and put that as a token as a baseline. If you didn't draft any no rune, you have no rune one available.
Yep, and it's also good to note that our chess pieces that we picked, they're all resources. So it is something you have to give up if you want to be running no rune. You lose your resources.
Yeah.
Okay.
So some of the equipment obviously still have Arcane Barrier, like Spellfire Cloak and Ripple Rapture have Arcane Barrier. But rather than picking a card up for Arcane Barrier, you're picking the card up for the resource ability, which is more interesting.
Yeah. Yep. So the cards that we removed are here: quelling slippers and quelling sleeves. This is the last chance for quelling the shine, and it did not shine. So I turned them into Snapdragon Scalers for more go again. Ranger was underperforming again. So let's just make them go wide. Let's just what's it? Rip the band-aid off. Let's just give them all the go wide cards.
Yep.
And having go wide on your equipment on the board, so much better than actually actively drafting go wide cards like Ravenous Rab or Life for Life. Yep. So Lightning Surge, more go again for Lexi. Then since we were anticipating Ranger to be good or like much stronger, we also buffed Kano, so he can also keep up, and also so Wizard can, or Kano will be more appealing to draft, because as you saw, we have 2 Red Ledgers and 2 Nocts. This also gives Kano 2 Sonic Booms and 2 Lesson and Lavas to pick from. Keeping Blazing Ether at 1, because being high rolled by Blazing Ether is not fun. So just keeping it as 1.
So one thing I wanted to note with the Kano changes especially is that we overall increased the speed of the cube, which I haven't talked about too much because it's not super important. But if your cube in general is feeling too fast or too slow, you can make sweeping changes like these where you just remove bad cards or add bad cards across the board so that the average consistency of a deck goes down.
You mean goes up?
Oh, it goes up or goes down as needed.
Okay.
Basically.
Yeah. Yep. And then this is the patch, quote unquote patch, where we changed a lot of the ice cards. There's less ice blues because Ice Slender was obviously a little bit too strong. And we made them red. Yeah, so we're now down to 104 blues and a ton of more reds.
Yep.
Like this is
this is the version we tested it at Worlds with. This was, I think we finalized this around like late October or something, right before Worlds. And we decided to bring it over to Worlds to have a couple of people that we knew who were good limited players to test it out. So if you're looking to build the cube, I highly recommend that if you want to start off with something that you know is going to be, or is guaranteed by us to be a decent experience, go with version 1.2 or the following version, because those are the ones that we've played and we've decided there's not too many more changes necessary that we need to make before we actually get new cards.
Yeah, I think this cube was probably, or this version was played the most out of all of us. So we played with Eric from Spark of Genius. We played from with Nia, the Battle Hardened winner at Toronto. We played with Yuki from On the Bauble. And we played with Viet Pham, the Sink Below guy, as people will probably remember him. Yeah.
Yeah, so we played with a couple of semi famous names back in Worlds.
Yep. And it was it was all a very positive experience. I think Yuki talked about it. Yuki, Eric, Nia, they talked about it in the Spark of Genius recap of Worlds. So yeah, I would say this project was pretty successful at this point.
Yep. So yeah, let's not talk about too much about the changes here. Mostly because I don't think they're particularly like, most of the changes that we made from this version to the next version were just, let's just take out some cards and add in some new ones and see how they perform.
Yeah, that was going to Dynasty. One thing I want to note is we had an even pod, 2-2-2-2. Everyone was on. There's 2 of each hero. That was the pod that I won with Lexi and pivoted pack 2 or whatever. Then in the other pod that we played, Eric was the only Icelander and he was able to get first. So it's good to see like the power level is pretty even across the board. And if you can get away with being the only hero at the table, you will do very well. This is why I think this is the most balanced and well-performing version of the cube.
Yeah, we haven't done too much testing with 2.0. We did a couple of drafts with it, but in terms of number of drafts to results, 1.2 is probably the best.
Yep. All right. So going into the Dynasty version, it was literally just take out cards and put in Dynasty cards. So we had the Swell Tidings, the Mind Warp, the Prognosticates, the Tempest Aura. The reason why I didn't put the red Tempest Aura in is because it hits a breakpoint, which I do not like. And then
so most of these changes were to basically just let's try out some new cards. Hopefully this doesn't mess with the balance too much. See how they perform. For the most part, I would say they probably performed just as we expected them to. The new Surge cards for Wizard were basically just strict upgrades from the vanilla cards. Like you had Zap changed to like, or you had
I
like
took out Zap, but yeah, these are the changes
yeah.
in this corner right here.
Yeah, like a couple like just generically boring Wizard cards that were just replaced with more interesting Swell cards. The idea was that this would encourage Kano players to move in a little bit more than they have. I didn't notice any effects, but theoretically, that's what should happen, basically.
Yep. And then during Worlds, I found Life for Life was a little bit too strong. So I made them Nimblism and Nimble Strikes instead. Yep. That's why I put a bunch in. And you can't really have like 2 Nimble Strikes, 2 Nimblisms. So that's why I kind of overloaded it, but I changed it in going to the next version. Yep. Adding Heat Seekers and Drill Shots. We didn't want to add aim counters at this point because we would have to add the bow, the Sandscar bow, and I was not a fan of aim counters at the time. So
you still aren't, right?
Yeah, I'm not really, but now more cards have come out, and I'm warming up to it a little bit more.
Yep. And so yeah, so if you want our last stable version that we have a seal of approval on, you can play version 2.0, which includes Dynasty cards. Our next version, which is we're unveiling it today, has all of the Outsiders cards, which are mostly Azalea cards. I haven't seen too much of this. We talked about it a little bit briefly before, but Oliver, you want to go into what we wanted to test out with Azalea?
Yeah. So in our playtest, the best Azalea got was 2-1. It got to the finals and it choked against Kano. That was me against Yichin. Yeah. That was the best performance of Azalea that we have seen out of all of our playtests. Usually she goes 1-2 or 0-3.
To be fair, Azalea did go 2-1 plenty of times. And you won the best of 3, right? I'm pretty sure you won the best of 3.
Yeah. I won the best of 3. I just got a Ranger hand, and you went first, and I had what, 1 Arcane Barrier, 2 Arcane Barrier. So yeah. Azalea can win. You just need to get good. All right. So going into the changes, I feel like Seekers items very good. It adds some tension between Wizard, specifically Kano and Azalea. I have found that Seeker's equipment is very nice and limited from Outsiders drafting. And in turn, I also added in, where are they? Peace of Minds. Peace of Mind and Seeker's equipment, good combo. Pitching a blue, obviously. Obviously, too easy to get go again. And so I just turned them into buffs. Premeditate, I think is a very good card, and it's a quote-unquote fixed plunder run. So I just kind of strictly upgraded that.
It's important to note that before, Azalea had this issue where, prior to, I want to say, Dynasty, she had this issue where she was basically playing second fiddle to Lexi in terms of like how she was built, because her buffs weren't really like working out, and she was basically just like playing a Gib to Lexi that like used Death Dealer. So now that Outsiders and Dynasty have come out, and she's been solidified into buff a single arrow, shoot a big arrow, and maybe attack with a generic attack if you have extra cards. We wanted to bring that playstyle into the cube. And so, a lot of these changes are going to be gearing Ranger to be more towards big attacks, going tall.
Yeah. Before I did say the cube is quite balanced, maybe a little bit Ranger leaning. I feel Ranger will dominate this version of the cube. So we'll go over that eventually. We added cut down the size. I had this as Wreck Havoc before. This is kind of up in the air right now. Yichin said to change it to cut down the size because Wreck Havoc doesn't really.
It's more relevant.
Yeah. And then Give and Take, I feel, is actually quite interesting in Azalea, and is also just a nice generic attack in every single hero. Yeah. I didn't want to put 2 in because you can do the Give and Take loop. So that's why there's only 1. And then I changed some of the Azalea specific cards from Ranger into better Azalea specific cards.
Yeah.
And then the Skybound shot, Yichin likes the art so much that we had to take out a red headshot, and that was the last headshot that was in the cube.
This is actually something I wanted to go over. We have Infecting Shot, we have Sedation Shot in cube. Skybound Shot is strictly worse than both those cards. But the thing is that Infecting Shot and Sedation Shot are both really good cards. Like almost like really like just like really, really strong. I didn't really want to add a red version of that. So my thoughts were, 1, I like Skybound Shot, and 2, it's a vanilla arrow that can be used as just a big attack, but it doesn't have the extra power level that the disease shots include in it. So I was like, let's try out, in fact, Skybound Shot, see how it feels. I don't think it'll be too strong. And honestly, at this point, given all the changes, I'm worried about that. So we'll keep it at 1 red Infecting Skybound Shot for now. And if it turns out Azalea is too strong, we might change some of the other shots to Skybound shots as like a kind of power down method.
Or just change it back to headshots.
Or change it back to headshots, sure.
Yep. Yeah. So that's why you aren't seeing any of the red ailment arrows, because 1 for 4 is already pretty good. It's gonna either force blocks or cause a tempo swing. So
One for five.
No. 1 for 5 if it has a aim counter.
Yeah,
but
right.
Yeah, 1 for 4 at yellow is also already pretty good. Falcon Wings over Sigum shots. Sigum shot costs a resource. We don't like that. And then 1 barbed undertow. It is good to note that we are adding Crow's Nest. That's why we're adding all these aim counter supporting cards. Yep. And then we have Deadeye. We didn't have Deadeye before. Now we have it now because there's actually aim counter support. Before it would just be a block 3. Murkmao Grapnel, I feel like this is going to be a pretty key card now that we have a lot of damage prevention in the cube. So it's actually could be used for a finisher if that's the case. Yep, and then we have 1 of each ailment error or ailment buff. You're gonna have on-demand dominate from Shiver, so you're gonna be getting a lot of the ailments more. So that's what I was afraid of adding too much on hit effects. So that's why there's only 1 of each. And then Fletcher Blue Tail, Fletcher Red Tail. You can see the counts here. Red Tail and Blue Tail. It's more an Azalea buff because they only get the effect if it has an aim counter. And then since we anticipate that Ranger is going to be top tier in this version of the cube, we changed some of the weaker cards in Icelander, Sigil, Permafrost namely, because that's kind of the feedback that we got, into more damage and more disruption. Also allows them to fuse more consistently. Kano, I didn't change anything for Kano because I feel like Kano's in a good spot. You just high roll them, right?
Yeah. Well, kind of. There's a bit of a waiting game to be played as well, but waiting game and setup game you can do with like epots and like potions of deja vu. I think Kano's gonna be perfectly fine. Probably gonna be one of the weaker heroes this iteration. We'll probably do some tests and see where he's lacking and where we can like increase his power level if needed, or we can revert a bunch of changes and make sure that Ranger's power level stays roughly in line with Wizard until they reprint Kano in a new set.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I anticipate Inertia to be very strong against Icelander and Kano, so that's why I only have 2 sedation shots and 1 Inertia. Yep. So that is
everybody, honestly.
Yeah. Yep. So that's the cube. we do have, or you have a plan for the cube for upcoming changes, rather.
Yeah. Um, you can go ahead and view these changes in our public spreadsheet that's also linked in the description. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. But yeah, basically, this is going to be a general video about explaining about our cube. We do have a couple of other limited environments in the works that we're going to probably be unveiling in the next week or so. Um, but yeah, I love limited. Limited's great. We're going to be talking a lot about limited this season. So yeah, look forward to it.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, didn't you have an idea for 450 cards? But I guess that's out of
Oh,
scope.
yeah, so I did kick this around where we have different size cubes. Obviously 360 is the default size, but in Magic you have like 420 size, 450, 540, up to like 900 or 720 size cubes, where people just like jam every card they like in them. I won't talk about it too much here, mostly because I'm still working out if I actually want to do this, or if that will be an idea that we save for another cube that features different heroes. As the general card pool expands, we'll have a lot more options to work with. Right now, we kind of made Midwinter Cube as one of the only interesting cubes to us. But in the future, I definitely do want to have like a Guardian Roomblade cube, or Oliver wants a Money cube, where he plays like Kasai and Arachne and all those other cards that like support money. So yeah, we'll see what the future brings, and we'll see what we can cook up with all these different ideas.